Hey, this video is for Greek class. This goes along with your Croy textbook, and so you might want to follow along. We're actually going to combine chapters 10 and 11. It's going to be fine because they really present what is one concept in all of the chapters moving forward. So it's going to present both the active and the middle passive of the imperfect. So far, you've only been able to read sentences in the present tense. That is changing as of today. You're going to be able to read some things in the past. And so the imperfect is one of our past tenses. We actually have 3 past tenses in Greek. The imperfect tense is formed from the present tense stem, though. So the good thing is this is not a new principal part. We'll talk about that soon in chapter 13, or chapter 12 that's coming up. But it doesn't talk about the present. It talks about continuous past action, or past action that happens over a period of time. And so we're going to end up translating it something like this. I was believing. I was hearing, or I heard them every week would be in the imperfect tense. Like it happens again and again. It's not something that's completed as a perfect time, and it's not undefined time. Instead, it's continuous action time. So forming the imperfect tense for the active, you begin with the present tense stem. So the stem that you already know. The first principal part is what we're going to start calling it. That's the present tense stem. And then to the front, you add an epsilon, because epsilon is one of the ways that we're going to denote all of our past tense forms. So all of them will have something at the beginning to help us know that they're in the past tense. And so that's really, really, really important for recognizing it. And then you're going to get a new set of endings, but they're not so crazy different that if you want to go the step of memorizing them, you can, but I'm not necessarily going to mandate that you memorize them, because you're going to use that epsilon at the front to help you recognize and figure things out by context. Okay, this is what it looks like. You take your stem, lu, right, for luo. You add to it this epsilon at the beginning, and you also see how when it's actually moved over, it has that smooth breathing mark. They chiseled breathing marks into stone. They are actually important. I don't care if you can learn anything about accents, but the breathing mark has to be above that epsilon, a smooth one, because it makes an eh sound, not a heh sound. So an eh, lu, and then you add to it what's going to be our new endings. Eluon is the first person singular. And then you're going to go on from there. Eluace. It sounds but doesn't look exactly like what we know so far, because you don't have an iota or anything like that in there. But it's basically an epsilon with the sounding that you're used to. Eluen, or e or n, you'll get the new if the next word begins with a vowel. You won't get the new if the next word begins with a consonant. All that is trying to speed up the way that we talk. You have eluamen, eluete. You have that lu. You add the epsilon to the front. You add an epsilon connecting vowel in the te. And then eluon is also they. So you're going to need some context clues to help you. Here might be how you translate it, because it's things that happen in the past but over a period of time, or that happen repeatedly. So like, I was loosening the bonds of everyone, or I was loosening everyone's chains. You were loosening everyone's chains. Jesus was loosening everyone's chains, something like that. So these are the sounds of the words again. Eluon, eluace, eluen, eluamen, eluete, eluon. I was loosening, you were loosening, he, she, it was loosening, we were loosening, y'all were loosening, they were loosening. This is the form of it. Again, like I was saying to you, I don't know that you actually need to memorize this. I was told to memorize it as a student, but if you can learn eluon, you know the first person singular and the third person plural. Amen and ete, the first person plural and the second person plural, look exactly like what you already know. And if you're pronouncing it correctly, eluace, although it's slightly different, you're going to recognize it. Since you're not writing Greek, but you're translating it back to English, you're going to know the vast majority of this. This is just not that different from what we already have. I would say eluace, eluen, eluomen, eluete is already simple enough, and you just need to learn the first person singular, and the third person plural is eluon. One word to learn. That's it, I hope. These are those endings, on, ace, and men, te, on. And they look so much like the endings we already had. That's why I'm saying don't memorize, recognize the patterns that are here. I would prefer that you do it, though, on this verb, pisteuo, because I like this word to believe instead of to destroy or to loosen. So epistuon, epistuace, epistuen, epistuamen, epistuete, epistuon. Pisteuo is a totally stable, consistent verb, and there's no unusual forms to it, and so that's why it's also a perfectly fine one to use to learn things on, and so I prefer that. So these are them. Episteuon, I was believing. Episteues, you were believing. Episteuen, he, she, it was believing. Episteuamen, we were believing. Episteuete, y'all were believing. Episteuon, they were believing. So you can see that for our purposes in English to show that kind of continuous time, we tend to put was or were with the verb. So I was believing, you were believing. If you do that, that's probably the best way to get started on translating these. The epsilon augment for imperfect verb is always an epsilon. But here is one trick though. Once you start adding vowels, if the first letter of the word that you add it to is also a vowel, those vowels can combine together. And so that's why the examples I've shown you so far start with a consonant. Pisteuo starts with a P, right? Luo starts with a lambda. Once you get a vowel, here's what's going to happen. Let me show you some examples. Akuo is a verb you know, I hear. But in the past, in the imperfect, you get an epsilon at the front, and the epsilon and the alpha together make an eta. Akuon, I heard. Now, whenever I see a long vowel at the beginning of what seems to be a verb, I start to think, like, were there things that combined here? And if so, what could it be? So eku, I don't know anything like eku, but akuo is a really common verb, so I'm going to be able to recognize that. Here's another example, ago, which means I lead. Epsilon plus alpha equals eta, agon, I was leading. If you have an epsilon at the beginning, then you get two epsilons, still make an eta. So agero, I raise. Egeron, I was being raised. Egeron. Heurisco, which is like to find. If you add an epsilon at the front. Hey, here. This one's going to be tricky because you don't see it a lot in this form. Heuriscon would be it because it still has an H sound from that rough breathing mark. Heuriscon would be I was being found. So it's possible. It's a form that can exist. The point that you're looking at, though, is the epsilon and the alpha make an eta. The epsilon and the epsilon in the beginning make an eta. If you come across a verb that has an eta at the beginning, stop and think. Is this in the past tense? Like, are there maybe two vowels here? One more. If you have an omicron, the omicron is pretty powerful, and so it takes over things and makes it an omega. So aphelo, which means I owe, the epsilon, plus aphel, plus your secondary ending. Ophelon was I was being owed, or I was being, I was being debted. It would be weird too. So you're going to see some words more commonly in certain tenses, and so you'll get used to them too. But that is something that can happen, is the front vowel can combine. When it comes to compound verbs, so verbs that have a preposition kind of at the front, so you've learned a bunch of these, that epsilon doesn't go at the very, very beginning, it goes in the middle. So you're going to have to look around for it a little bit. Again, if I see a preposition at the front, I'm going to look in the middle. Apakteno means I kill, and so apektenon, I was killed. I was being killed, or I was, Katabino means to go down, I go down. But kat-e-bainon means I was going down, so you were descending for a long period of time. The same rules about lengthening apply to compound vowel verbs. Sometimes you get a compound verb with a connecting vowel as the vowel that begins the actual verb form. So here's an example, sunago, which means I gather. If you add an epsilon to the middle, you end up with an eta. So exactly that same combining that you saw before is going to happen here too. There are some just irregular imperfect forms. These are the two in your vocabulary, so they're the only two I would worry about for now, which is thelo can either have that epsilon at the beginning or it can have an eta even though it didn't combine with anything at the time of Greek that you know. There was an earlier version that had another epsilon over there, so that's why it can be aelphon, athelon, or ethelon. Same thing, mellow could be amelon or amelon, and it seems to be two words that attract that, so that's noted in your textbook. Let me give you a few example sentences. One is this, that you have imperfects that express action in the past that happens over a period of time. So, hey Mace, aan bijnamen ta hieron didasken. We were going up to the temple to teach. Here's how we know we were going up. Ane bijnamen. Do you see that epsilon before the beta? That's making it in the past imperfect. It's something that happens again and again. You're doing it regularly. You're constantly going up to the temple to teach every day. Here's another example in a sentence. Ego, elegon, auto, kai autoi, sunegon. So you've got two imperfects here. The first one I know because I got the epsilon before in Lego. So I was speaking to him, and also they were gathering. And I can see that eta is the epsilon plus the alpha together. We're going to go over a bunch of sentences in your homework and in class, so you'll get used to them. The last thing in chapter 10 is it does just show you the to be verb has its own forms of Amy. And these ones, I don't think you need to memorize these ones because they follow the same pattern of what you know. And they are just there. So when you see a short word with an eta at the beginning, you might start thinking, is this an Amy verb? When you're forming the middle passive, so mostly I've spent my time talking about the active, but chapter 11 is just to say, follow the same steps of finding the stem, the first principal part, add an epsilon to the beginning, and add the secondary endings. These are going to be them, elu amen, elu u, elu eta, elu amatha, elu este, elu anta. These ones, which would be like, I was being loosed, you were being loosed, it adds even more like layer to it. I don't see these very often. You won't see these very often, so I'm not as worried about them. What you're partly learning right now are the new endings. These are the middle passive endings of the secondary form. Main, u, ta, metha, este, anta. You have some that are actually exactly the same as what you've seen, so metha and este are already easy for you. The me, main, you often have a my, oh my, like in chapter 9, so that one ought to be okay for you. And then you might have to learn the rest, but rather than memorizing these, again, these are ones that I would maybe write a few times out by hand, practice them in sentences, and just learn them that way rather than trying to learn them on their own. Again, the verb I prefer for you to use is pisteuo. It follows the same thing. Add the epsilon to the beginning, add the stem, the connecting vowel, and then the ending. Epistu amen, epistu u, epistu eta, epistu amatha, epistu este, epistu anta. And so these are those verbs, and it now means I was being believed, because you're not doing the thing, it's happening to you, so I was being trusted over time, or you were being believed, or he, she, it were being believed. These ones are not as common, so that's why we kind of put them together. Here's kind of an overview, though, of some of the most important things. Imperfects are just built off of your present tense stem, so they still belong to the first principal part. It doesn't matter to you yet, but it will start mattering in chapter 12, so just go with me for now. It's on the first principal part. Imperfects always have epsilon augments at the front of the verb, and so that epsilon is what is helping you to recognize that it's in the past tense. With compound verbs, the epsilon goes after the preposition but before the verb, so be sure you look there. Imperfects use the secondary tense endings, and so you want to learn these especially for the present, but as you can see, you really only need to learn one in the active, and for the imperfect active, you don't need to learn all of them. And then the imperfect tense expresses continuous action or action that occurs over a period of time or action that is repeated. This is a slightly longer video, but it covers 2 chapters at once. So I would again encourage you to maybe go and take a look at this video again a second time. Read through the chapter, start doing some work on the sentences, and if you have questions, you can email me or bring them to class. This is going to make sense as we do it. And so let me encourage you to just jump straight in and start doing it. Okay, great. Looking forward to it.